Okay, well, I have 18:35 in Bruce County time, so we're going to start this evening's technical event. So, welcome everybody. It's June the 3rd, and I can't believe almost half the year has gone already, and most of us are still living in this COVID world. So, please, everybody, we'll get there in the end, and stay safe is my message to everybody, and hopefully everybody's getting their vaccines and moving on and getting close to getting back to some semblance of normality. So tonight we're going to welcome Jim Krebs and Brennan Cagney, who are going to do a presentation on for us on the entitled "You Can't Get There From Here." I'm going to let them talk us about what that means and that journey they're going to take us on tonight. Jim, I believe you're the incoming president of AACE. Is that correct?
That's correct. I actually take office. I guess it's the 23rd, right. The last day of the what we're calling the Boston retreat. So after the Connex.
Right, excellent. Yeah, and obviously with Shoshana as the president-elect. So we're in honored company here tonight. So that's we'll all be here we go. So anyway, so on that note. I'm going to turn it over to you, Jim, and I'll let you get this presentation rolling. And thanks very much for joining us tonight. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Rob. Thank you very much. I hope you can see the screen at this point.
Yes, sir.
Excellent. So again, yes, thank you to you, Rob, and the Bruce County section, and a special shout out to Shoshana, who reached out to us at least with the invitation to do this. As you mentioned, Rob, our paper's entitled "You Can't Get There From Here," what we call a real-world application of recommended practice RP 80R13, entitled "Estimate at Completion EAC" as it relates to earned value. And we presented this originally as part of the 2020 Connex, the first virtual conference and expo in AAC's history, as paper number EVM 3456. We modified our little cover slide here, this little graphic in the right-hand corner. The one where we were quarantined, that was the speaker gift. We all got mouse pads that gave presentations in that Connex. So we enjoyed that, a little memory from that. And if you haven't, Rob, to the attendees, we're going to have Rob launch a little poll, just a couple of real simple questions. Brennan will address here in just a few minutes, but if Rob would launch that, you'd take a minute to simply reply. We sure would appreciate that. So with that. So I will let Brennan unmute and tell us a little bit about himself.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Brennan Cagney. Thank you again to Shoshana and the section for having us. Greatly appreciate the opportunity to talk to all of you tonight. So work for ACM, director there. Just a few more things about me on this slide, but the most important one being probably that bottom one. That my years of experience are primarily from the owner's perspective. I primarily work for owners' clients in my career. I think that's a good thing and a bad thing. But what I think for this paper is it brings a nice little look at this. My case study is a little different than Jim's because I have a little different look at it as I was an active participant on an owner's project, which is, like I said, a little tweak from how Jim's going to present his case study. So.
Thank you, Brennan. And a little bit about me, as Rob said, I've been very active in AACE for a great number of years, both locally in the Great Lakes section, which is where Brennan and I are both from, which is Southeast Michigan, basically the Detroit area. Also Central Ohio sections, a couple of stints on the board of directors. Think very, very highly of the association and have the honor coming in a week or so to hopefully service the organization well as president for a month, working very closely with Shoshana. So I'm real excited about that. Mechanical engineer by education, been doing project controls for more years than I like to think. The thing that astounds me is I've been at this 34 years and I'm only 27 years old. So that being said, my CCP might be in question. My math's a little bit off there, but jokes aside, I've spent many years, out in the field, involved in project controls. I've been fortunate to have been involved in planning and scheduling, progress measurement, cost engineering, cost control, really sort of all aspects of project controls, and been fortunate again to have been on projects that were successful and some that weren't. And I've always had this thought that we have all these tools in project controls, the great tools that AACE has and we all use, but what it doesn't always help us do is determine what is the right time on the project to really sort of declare victory or defeat, if you will. And I don't mean as project controls people, we just declare defeat and step aside, but at some point, projects get to a point, at least my belief, where really you just can't recover. And then there's also points in time where in a project where you determine that you really are going to make it, and it's time to really commit to that concept that you're probably going to achieve success on the project. And I've always wondered really what is that point, and that's what led Brennan and I to kind of look at this RP and take a look at the topics we're going to present tonight, and hopefully shed some insight into that concept. Just my little sales pitch here. Brennan and I both work for Administrative Controls Management. Been a project management consulting firm since 1985. In short, what we do is we provide services of almost exactly those skill sets that are provided and educated and certified by AACE International. Our headquarters is in Michigan, as I mentioned, offices in Ohio and North Carolina in the US, but we've been also fortunate to work in Canada in a number of locations, and certainly as a lifelong Detroiter, appreciate our Canadian neighbors. To spend as much time as I can over in Windsor, and enjoying our friendship as countries, if you will. The company has about 70 people. We are certified WBE, so kind of enough of the sales pitch, if you will. As I mentioned, we have the poll up. And as I said, I think some folks are answering it. It's do you regularly use EVM, and have you used TCPI in the past? Right. But my question really is, on the projects, for all of us that have been doing project controls, have you ever asked yourself, any of the following questions? Right? Are we being honest about our forecast? Are we being honest to ourselves about where we really stand in the project? Right? Are we being overly optimistic about the performance on the remaining work? Right? And I think as a project people, we have a tendency to be optimists. I think if we're not optimists, we probably don't stay in this profession very long. Right? Particularly as project controls people. What do we want to do? We want to get information. We want to measure our project. We want to utilize those tools that we have, and we want to improve the performance of the project. Right? So I caught myself doing it. I've listened to project teams. Well, we know we've done, a certain performance to date, but we're going to get better. We know we can get better. We know our performance can improve, and we're optimists, right? But do we ask ourselves, that question that we put in the title of our paper? Can we get there from here? Right? Can we get done? At some point in time when you're on a project and you've reached a level of performance, the question has to be asked is can we get back to the goals of our project, really on time and on budget? And we're specifically, in this presentation, going to focus on the budget side of things principally, but can we get there from here? Can we get back, right? And when we're forecasting our project, right, what is the right estimate at completion calculation? If you look at the recommended practice, there are a number of methods to calculate the estimate at completion for the project, but which one's the right one, right? So we're here to talk about a little bit different use of the tools, right? What cost performance do I need to achieve on the remaining work to get back on budget or get back on my current forecast, right? We know where we are. We know the performance to date, but if we asked ourselves, what do we need to do for the remainder of the job? As the job moves on, right? If we're lagging in cost performance, what improvement level do we need to get back on track? These are the types of questions that I just think, I could be wrong, but I just think in my experience, at least, don't get asked often enough, right? And then the big question, which sort of led to the little tongue-in-cheek title of our paper, right? Is the improvement that we need, right? The improvement we need to get back on track to bring our project in, is that even possible at the point in time we're at, right? Is that even possible, right? At the point in time, right, that we're at. Right, so why are we here today? You know, we're not here to denigrate the traditional use of earned value, right? One of the most powerful tools in the cost engineer's toolbox, right? I love to call myself a project controls nerd when I'm in front of people, and I am. I look at an earned value calculation. I look at a resource loaded schedule, and I still, after all these years, still look at that information and say, man, that is just some powerful information, right? That really does sort of make this profession enjoyable to me. The amount of information that you have when you're using those tools. So we're not here to say anything negative about the tools that are there, right? And the standard measures, the measures we see and report and are commonly reported, the SPI, the CPI, right? Cost variance, schedule variance. Again, we're not saying that they're not useful. And we're not saying that they don't provide great insight into past performance, because they do, right? However, they don't provide the standard use of the tools of earned value management, don't provide that estimate of what it's going to take, right? And can we get there? It just doesn't do it, right? So we're here principally tonight, right, to hopefully share something that might be a little new to you, and that's the 2 complete performance index, right? And it's, you know, help provide that what will it take data, right? That how do we get there type of data. So we're hopefully gonna bring something a little bit new. You know, I always heard that you know, the reason to get up in front of somebody and talk is to entertain, educate, or motivate. So I've attempted a joke, so we'll put entertainment aside. But even if it's not education and new, hopefully it's just a motivation to maybe keep on doing what you're doing, or add a little more rigor. So with that, I'm going to see if I can pass this over to Mr. Cagney.
All right, it says I can control it. Let me just test it. All right, good. All right, cool. Let me just back it up here. All right. Rob, can you share the polling, please? Polling results. Okay. So 2/3 regular use EVM. That's great. Incorporate TCPI, 16%. Oh, Jim, I'd say that's about what we've seen. Probably given this paper 6 times, 7 times, 8 times. You know, I would say that's actually a TCPI, yes, on TCPI, maybe a little higher than what we've seen. So good, good. Well, this just gives us a flavor, you know, of just kind of our audience. And we're gonna spend a little time here in this section, just talking about some basics. We're gonna quickly cover all the things that Jim just mentioned very briefly, so then we can introduce TCPI with all the same kind of foundation, if you will. So. All right, so what is earned value? Being an AACE section, we went right to the AACE book. Earned value is the measure of the work performed at some given point in time. So how much of the scope, how much of the plan has been accomplished on a given date? So pretty straightforward. I'm fairly confident we've all used this terminology before. But then let's kind of get technical, because sometimes we use the word earned value, but we really mean earned value management, right? With the use of that data to do something with it, to measure yourself against your plan and what you've spent. So with that, what's earned value management? According to AACE, it's a project progress control system, enables objective comparison. So objective being a key word that we're going to use here several times tonight, of the earned to the actual to the plan. So let's just talk about this just a little bit. So it's a system. So by definition, a system has inputs, outputs. So that makes sense, right? Some interrelated parts. That's true for earned value, right? You got to have all these components and they all kind of tie together to give you the output, the report. And then you apply the intelligence and you've got something to work with in terms of redirecting a project down the right path. So objective comparison. So again, Very important to understand that, it kind of supposed to take kind of the bias out of it. And we'll talk about that a little bit more here as we go. Of those 3 key data points that we're going to cover rather quickly here. So what do you need to have for an earned value management system? So at the top of the triangle I'm showing in front of you is the scope, right? You have to have a well-defined project. Without that, what are you building? What are you really estimating? What are you really scheduling? Which are the other 2 very important components for an earned value management system. Good scope, a good budget, and a good schedule are critical to an EVM system. And then ultimately, a manner in which to measure your progress. Whether it's a resource-loaded schedule with regular updates, a really good CPM schedule, by the way, whether maybe it's an engineering contract and you're going to use some rules of credit for drawing completion, or maybe it's some type of physical percent complete in the field against the schedule values. Whatever your system is, you have to set it up early and utilize it throughout. So oftentimes from the owner's perspective, develop it and then carry it through to the various contracts. So just a little bit here on this page, I have to cover a little bit for those that are thinking that maybe this is something I want to do on a project. It takes time to implement earned value. Oftentimes you don't have what you need to walk on a job that's in execution and say, I'm going to do earned value today. So it takes time. You got to think about, where's the data coming from? Is it aligned to a common structure or control accounts, as AACE uses the terminology control account, or WBS? Where is the information come from? Are we aligned in terms of when is it coming in? So we're doing schedule updates and receiving actual hours, dollars, whatever it might be at a given point in time. So it takes a lot of thought. You gotta plan it out. That's what we're here for on projects as project controls professionals. So those 3 quantifiable data points that I mentioned, we're just going to cover them real quick, just to make sure we're all on the same page here. So the first one, planned value, I think is the most common term for it, or budgeted cost of work schedule is another term for it. It's the amount of the work we plan to have accomplished at a given point in time. So generally speaking, this comes from establishing a baseline schedule and picking a point in time along that baseline saying, all right, as of this date, we're going to measure ourselves. How much should we have accomplished? Earned is the amount we actually accomplished, the amount of work we actually accomplished. Again, at a certain given point in time. And then last but not least, how much did we spend to get there? Very often, these are not equal. You generally spend more or less to earn what you've earned to date, as we all know. So again, all 3 of these data points can be, we can use units of man hours or dollars. We're going to use man hours moving forward. I think it's a little more intuitive. Jim agreed. So we're just going to keep it simple and think dollars from here on out. We're almost done with the basics. So let's just cover those ratios Jim mentioned earlier. So let's talk about cost. How are we doing on cost? Cost performance index, we've probably all heard of it. The ratio is rather simple. It's earned over actual. So if you've earned more than you've actually spent, the ratio is greater than 1, and it's favorable. We're under budget. It means we're getting more work accomplished for every man hour we expend on the project. So we're doing pretty good. Let's talk cost variance, CV. That's the earned less the actual. So again, if we've earned more than we spent, our variance is positive and we're under budget. Rather simple. But again, it's all the work to get there, right? Jim and I were just talking about that in his office yesterday. It's all the work to get to this point where you can run these calculations and have confidence in the numbers. SPI, Schedule Performance Index. The ratio is earned over planned. So if you've earned more than you anticipated to have earned, or how many hours you plan to have accomplished at that time, so you earn more than you expected, the ratio is greater than 1 and you're ahead of schedule. Similarly to cost variance, you take the difference between the earned and the planned, the numerator and the denominator. And if you have a positive variance, it means you've earned more than you plan to have earned at a given point in time. you have a positive number and you're ahead of schedule. So little disclaimer here, SPI, you're greater than 1, you're ahead of schedule. That's not necessarily true. That's a whole nother topic we could get into. Technically, your critical path could be behind, and you're working on work that has float, and you've pulled it forward and accomplished that work. So you've still earned the hours, even though maybe your critical path is falling behind. That gets onto a whole nother paper. Earned schedule is something you could search for as another metric you could look at to get a better look at exactly that. So let's just talk about, go back to the RP. It's titled Estimate at Completion. So this RP is all about telling you different ways to reforecast the project. So very simply put, an estimate at completion is your actual cost to date, what you've spent, plus whatever your estimate is to complete it. That's the tricky one, right? What is it going to take to finish? And that's what this paper is all about. So we're just going to throw up some formulas. We're not going to go through them all, but the RP has 7 different ways to calculate your estimate at completion. Simple to sophisticated, even introduces productivity, even introduces SPI. There is some commonality there in those 2 metrics, often on a project. So they're all tools to get you a forecast to the end. But this paper is all about which one's the right one. So let's just kind of recap here for a second. We've got metrics that we're tracking against. They're looking in the past, right? How are we doing to date? We've got this RP that's all about different ways to reforecast the future. Okay, but what's the common denominator? What's bringing it all together? How do you choose the right EAC calculation? And that's the concept of TCPI, the 2 Complete Performance Index. Before I even go into the formula, we've calculated our CPI, which is really our productivity. So what have we achieved to date? And what is it going to take, this TCPI, to go performance index? What do we need in order to accomplish, either to get back to our budget or to some EAC that we've selected out of all those formulas? Sorry, there's a little lag here. So the first one we'll talk about is TCPI to get back to your budget at completion. So simply put, it's the budget less the earned. Okay, so what's left to accomplish divided by your budget less what you've spent. So how much of your budget is left? So it's the work to go divided by your budget left. All right. Very similar. Again, sorry about the lag here with my controls, but what is it going to take that to get back to this EAC? So let's say our budget, the TCPI we think is too high. It's not realistic. We've been running at a 0.9. The TCPI to get back to our BAC came back at a 1.2. We don't think we can get there, but we don't really know. But let's say, hey, let's reforecast based on some of these other EAC calculations and see what it's going to take and see what that TCPI comes back with. So very similar. The TCPI to some EAC is the work to go based on that EAC calculation divided by what's left to spend based on that EAC. So now we've got various EAC calculations we can choose from. We've got this TCPI, but how do we really know if we're being objective? Because we've been objective to this point, but how do we know if we're being objective and which EAC we choose? A couple clauses in the RP that we wanted to call out that really answered this question for Jim and myself. The first one is a difference in anything greater than 0.1 between the TCPI and your current CPI, cumulative, of course, is significant. So we're running at 0.8, and based on the EAC calculation we chose, we need a 0.9 to finish. RP saying anything greater than 0.1, that difference is going to be hard to get to. We're going to go from a 0.8 to a 0.9 or 0.9 to a 1.0. So it may indicate that the EAC is not achievable given where you've been to date. Another important caveat is beyond 50 and 20% of the project completion, you won't see significant improvement in the cost performance index in your productivity. I think we probably all can say that based upon our experience. I would add to that, you've really got to segment the work and not base the mechanical contractor's performance based on how the civil guy did. There's no real correlation except for maybe some common things, but again, they're truly independent packages with different contractors. You could get a different result. Maybe not. Maybe you just got a poor engineer on board and they're producing awful packages. But so there is maybe some commonality, but probably not. And I would choose to, my personal opinion was I would evaluate them separately. So I would go a step further and say, segment the work, analyze the work differently. But once that civil package is in play and they're at 20%, you probably got what you're going to get out of them in terms of productivity, and you're not going to see much change. So two very important clauses here that I think that back to myself when I was a young cost engineer 10 or so years ago, that if I could sit there with this in front of me, I think I would have been much more convincing sitting in the project manager's office about how I'm going to reforecast the job. This gives you some published, documented information that really tells you, are you going to get here? Can you get there from here? So, Jim, with that, I'll let you take it from here. I need to turn it back to you.
Very good. Yep. All right. The next place we're going to go in this presentation is to talk about a couple of case studies, but I want to back up to this slide because Brennan said a couple of really powerful things here, and I really think that they're worthy of at least a little bit of reinforcement. First and foremost, I think there can be a tendency when we get very deep into earned value is to let the numbers speak for themselves. And Brennan made a couple of comments in his closing remarks that, it really is still incumbent upon the cost engineer. You've still got to read the information. You've got to dissect the information. You've got to try and get to the underlying causes as to why the numbers are there. So again, even though we're going to dive deeply into the numbers here for the next few minutes, I really don't want to get away from that point that we're not at all suggesting, and maybe even we're warning that we don't fall into that trap of just letting the numbers speak for themselves. So that being said, these two statements are, I don't want to say buried. I'm not trying to insult the RP at all, but they're in the middle of paragraphs in the recommended practice. And when I read them, they just jumped off the page at me. And again, it really is that if there's a difference between the performance you've achieved to date and the performance you need to achieve to get your project, bring your project in on budget of greater than 0.1, greater than a 10% variance, right? That improvement may not be achievable, right? They don't go so far in the recommended practice to say not and not give up, but that's a powerful, powerful statement. That really is, to me, a powerful, powerful statement. That's a lot of information. And then the second is that beyond 15 to 20%, you rarely see significant cost performance improvement on your project. And again, another just huge statement when I read it, particularly in light of the concept, and when I get into my case study, you're going to hear about this, that we often hear when we're looking at earned value management that early on in the project, the data is too variable, or it's based on ratios, so the denominators are small and things can move quickly. So therefore, we want to move well into the project before we start giving these earned value numbers any credence. But what this is telling you is really that's a trap, that you really need to start looking at this right at the 5, 10, 15% completion on your project. These numbers are important and important early. So that being said, as I mentioned earlier, this concept of how do we get home, right? What does it take to finish our project has been rattling around in my mind for quite some time. And when we came across this recommended practice and we kind of got excited about this idea, Brennan and I said, well, it'd be great to see this in action on a project. But we also wanted to get this paper and go through this analysis and put this paper together. So being impatient as I am, at least, we didn't want to wait for those new projects to come along. So we searched through our archives and we found two projects that we know very, very well. And in my case, the project I'm going to talk about was a forensic project. So it was a project that had some dispute involved, and there was some great study of all of the data after the case. And in the second case study, it was a project that Brennan lived. So again, he had a lot of that data there. So what we did in both cases is take this concept of TCPI and applied it sort of retroactively back against the project data to see if it might have given us some different insight or some different actions might have been taken based on that data. So I'm going to dive into the first case study. The project was a new combined cycle power plant. It was a first of a kind in the location for quite some time, maybe 30 or 40 years. A project like this hadn't been built. It was an electrical transmission distribution. The site was what we referred to on the job as the ultimate brownfield site, one of the oldest industrial facilities in the United States that the project was being built on. The contract was pretty straightforward, and then it was a lump sum EPC, engineer, procure, construct contract. And we're going to focus just on the construction portion of the job. And for purposes of this demonstration, the construction estimate was about 1.2 million hours, labor hours on the project to be expended over 2 years. Right, the project, some of the project controls, project management characteristics, the project had a very well-defined scope. However, there was some significant scope growth, which became a point of contention. But significant to me in this analysis and ultimately in the project was that the additional scope was known at the time the contract was executed, at the time the project was started. So the contractor, the EPC contractor, was well aware that this additional scope was coming. The owner just simply hadn't had the funds authorized by the board of directors, so it was really an administrative action that was needed. So although the contract went from one value to another that was quite large, it was not unknown scope growth. The contractor had a very good budgeting system that was well documented, well controlled, executed properly, so they had great cost numbers. They had a very good schedule, met all the proper CPM scheduling fundamentals, was updated on a regular basis, was used to manage the job. So those were there. And then they had a good progress management system. I might even say at the time, this project goes back a few years, probably a state-of-the-art progress management system at the time. So the triangle that Brennan presented with the progress measurement system, all of those characteristics are in place on this project, which allows us to get this good data that we had. So let's dive in. The traditional metrics were used on this project: SPI, CPI. They had detailed cost forecasting on the project and fairly significant cost reporting. And then from an earned value standpoint, they reported on what I like to refer to as the classic S-curves type of reporting. So in theory, the tools were in place to understand what was going on with the project. Right, so here was a recreation of the performance measurement baseline, the PMB, or to put it back in Brennan's terminology, the plan value. So this is the S-curve plan value. The project goes from month 1 to month 24, the two-year construction period, and the man hours climb from 0 up to the $1.2 million. Again, your sort of classic S-curve that forms the plan line for our earned value. So let's take a look at what actually happened on the project in a couple of different key points in time. So let's start at 5%. Well, 5%, this is a very true and faithful recreation of a chart that was actually included in the monthly report from the EPC contractor. It provides the S-curve, and down here at the bottom left, we can see the earned and actual lines appearing on the curve, and it gives us that whole holistic project look, but really it's difficult in my mind in this graphic to determine how we're doing. I mean, the thickness of the line is almost as thick as the variance between the areas. So again, as a reporting tool, it has its place, but it has some limitations. So, one way around that was, let's just take a close-up view, right? So we look at the first 3 periods, and now if we look at the curve, right, we have our plan line, our reddish line in the middle, the solid line, our actual, the green dots up above, and the earn down below, the blue dash line. And you can start to see that things aren't looking very good, that our earned is lagging both behind our plan and our actual cost at this point in time. But again, now we lose the holistic view that the S curve for the duration of the project gives us. So, both of those charts have a little bit of limitation, but let's just go ahead and look at the numbers. So if we just look at the mathematics, at 5%, the project was reporting an SPI of 0.83. So we're 17% behind where we want to be, right? We're about, we've accomplished about 17% less of the overall work than we had planned to at this point in time at the 3rd month. And when we start to look at the actual cost, it gets very, very dramatic, in that our CPI is only 0.5. So, a way to think of it is, we're earning 55 cents on the dollar, right, for the job. So again, things look not very good. And our TCPI is at 1.04. So even if we had been doing a TCPI calculation, which the contractor was not, 1.04, again, what are we as project people? We're optimists. That's a 4% improvement over our plan, right? Okay, 4%. That's sort of within the realm of error correction, if you will. I'm a good optimistic guy. We got a good team. We're getting out of the ground now. We're going to get rolling. We can do that, right? But now let's look at that variance that the RP talks about. That variance of 0.1, right? Greater than 0.1 might indicate that you have too much of a performance deficit to overcome. And our variance here is 5 times that indicator, right? So again, I don't know, right, if it's time to jump off the cliff yet, but it's 5 times that indicator. There's a significant variance between what we've achieved to date, right, and what we need to do to get back on track. And important, and this is going to be a distinction between the 2 case studies, an important thing to note here is that CPI of 0.5, right, that was fairly consistent across all of our work packages, right, all of our disciplines. So those numbers were very poor in mechanical, in civil, in electrical, in structural and steel systems. So it wasn't, one item or one trade or one location of the project that we were looking at, but it really was sort of pervasive across the project. It was across the board, if you will. So, so what was reported at that time? So we've got these numbers, as I said, but we as cost engineers, right, we report with our human intelligence. So the project was reporting on schedule and on budget at the time at 5%. Right, and quite frankly, there was no additional commentary in the report on those performance numbers. Right, they were simply put in the report. And the focus of the narrative, as you might expect, was on the early milestones, the events. We're out of the ground now. We're moving through the phases of engineering and procurement. We're in the field. We're doing this work. And at 5%, right, is it too early to jump off the cliff? Right? Do you want to report that we can't make it? I don't think so. But I think that the lack of commentary on anything about performance at this point was a little naive, and as I said, I have a little bit of a privilege here in that this was forensic. So I not only saw from the owner's perspective, but I actually got to see the internal correspondence on the EPC team, and they said the things that I talked about earlier. It's early. We don't like our start. We really feel we can overcome this. Right, those are early blip numbers. We're not too worried about it at this point, which is why we're reporting on schedule and on budget. So, again, it wasn't trying to mislead a client. It was looking at information, but sort of refusing to believe it, if you will. So let's jump ahead to 10%. Again, without beating sort of the same dead horse, if you will. Right, at our 10% performance, our big S curve for the duration of the project. Now we're 6 months in. At 10% progress, but again, still hard to see. You can see that the actual came back to the plan, but our earned is still lagging. Right, so let's dive into the closer look, and again, same kind of thing. You can start to see that. Let's look at our variances. Our SPI got worse. Right, so We didn't spend, our spend came down to match our plan, but we didn't achieve much of that plan. We're still not getting much work done. In fact, we're getting far worse. Our CPI, however, improved. So we gained some level of efficiency, but our progress was lagging. And our TCPI, still 107. Again, not even a 0.1 yet. We're not 10% away from our estimate and our plan. So again, it might be sort of misleading that we can get there, but we're still 4 times, right? 4 times that variance that the RP suggests, right? We can't overcome. So what are we saying? Again, right? Reporting on schedule, on budget. And the only commentary in the report on performance was the improvement in the CPI. So again, again, we went from 0.55 to 0.63, as we said there, right? That improvement in the CPI was talked about in the report, right? And the variance actually went down from 0.49 to 0.44. So, the indication might be we're headed in the right direction, right? But 90% of the project, but we still have a mountain of performance to overcome. So we're headed in the right direction, but we've got a long way to go. All right, so let's jump out to 25%. We're getting close to half of the duration of the project. And again, we can start to see that we're lagging behind the plan. We continue to lag behind the plan. Even actual costs now are lagging behind the plan, and we're still not earning anywhere near what we need to. Right, and now, at halfway, this S curve is starting to provide some useful, I think, information from a graphical standpoint, and from trying to interpret the graph and extrapolate some of the information. We're sort of out of that left-hand corner where things are all sort of bunched up, and we can start to see some of those. So the close-up view doesn't give us a lot more insight, but we start looking again at the numbers, and our SPI continues to fall. Now we're down to 0.55. Our CPI is 0.63, right? So the improvement we had from 10% to 25% sort of fell back. And now the TCPI number starts to be very, very alarming, right? Now we need to be 25% better than our estimate, than our plan, for the remainder of the project to get done. And that variance now is 6 times, right? 6 times where we are. And again, back to the 2 statements that Brennan talked about, and I tried to reinforce. At 15 to 20% or 15 to 25% on a project, significant cost performance is rarely achieved for the remainder of the project. So you've sort of set in to understand, where we are. And again, it remains across the board. All of our control accounts, all of our trades, we've got a significant problem on this job. Right? So reporting at 25%, contractor reports significant contingency reduction, but still reported internally to their own management and to the owner that the budget was achievable, that they were still able to get this project in on budget. And at that point in time, from what we've learned in the RP and studying these case studying, I really think, as hard as it is for us as project people to say this, that really they're probably at the point where they just can't get there, right? It's probably time, at least now, to start reporting some sort of an over budget situation, and that they can't, that we can't get home, right? So what happened? We're not going to go through any more points, but it was 35% complete, significantly later in the project, before the contractor, either internally and externally, reported that it looked like they were going to have a cost overrun on the project. And in a 4-month span, the forecast on the project went from 0 contingency to $4 million over budget, to $10 million over budget, to $75 million over budget. We referred to that as the $65 million day, where the contractor admitted internally that they were going to be about 40% over budget. And that's where the project finished. The ultimate result was a very, very significant and incredibly expensive dispute that took well over 5 years to resolve, and probably tens of millions of dollars by both parties. And maybe as important, what I think to this day is still irreparable damage to the relationships between the parties. This owner and this EPC was actually a conglomeration, and neither the design nor the construction side, as I know it, have done any more work with that owner. And you know, using TCPI, would that have solved the problem? Would that have saved the project? Probably not. But I do, again, at the risk of sort of talking out of school a bit, I do know the owner very well. Been fortunate to work with this owner for actually decades. And I find them, you know, in the general sense, to be fair business people. And I believe had the contractor early enough kind of owned up to where they were and gone in and discussed the situation with the owner, that there would have been an opportunity for certainly probably not to balance their books, but some sort of a business resolution.
You want more?
To a business resolution to a project that that, you know, as I said, ultimately really resulted in, just for lack of a better word, a nasty dispute. I mean, it was really guttural where they got. So again, like I said, we're not suggesting this is the magic wand. This is right, the remedy for all the ills on a project, but it's one more tool, as I said, in that toolbox that hopefully will help help on your projects. I will throw it back over to Brennan, and you will talk about a different case. You're muted, Brennan.
Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. So let's just chat about another case study. So this one's a little different. It did go well. We had a great team. It was a great project. Our metrics started out pretty good. It turned out just to be right where we wanted them. So we did have earned value in place. We were reporting out on it. We made lots of decisions along the way based on that data, but we weren't using TCPI. So I had predetermined, to be honest, an EAC calculation that we were going to use. And it did involve some productivity as a part of it, one of the calculations in the RP, and that's what we used. And then we looked at the trends of the earned value metrics, and we rolled with the EAC that I chose. So what's lacking was TCPI, looking at what we needed to finish, is that realistic, and evaluating ourselves that way. So just a little different look, and I think it's a good story, and we're going to talk about what we reported, what decisions do we make, and if we had TCPI, how would it have helped us? Would it have supported what we were doing? All right, a little bit about the project. So 250 megawatt coal plant here in the US. It was a 9-story boiler. We were replacing about a third of the tubes due to just quality issues, reliability issues due to tube leaks. So about a third of the boiler, 3,000 welds. And it was about a 9-week outage. There's actually another week at the end that you'll see, but that was really a chem clean week and some additional things the environmental group wanted to do. So we really had a 9-week window to do our work. We were the critical path. There was a turbine overhaul coming in that was in parallel with us, but we were the critical path. So that's going to be important later on. And we had about 120,000 man hours in that time period. So a little bit about the backstory. So I was supporting the major projects group for this client, for the owner. The last retube outage was 2 years prior and was a disaster from a project control standpoint. We utilized in both cases a T&M type contract, and the team on the prior outage asked for weekly reporting on cost. The contractor gave them a phone book of cost information, timesheets, supporting an invoice, and it took them all week to get through it, and they still didn't know where they were. So we spent this much. Okay, what does that mean? Are we still going to make it? So they couldn't answer those questions, and they knew they were in trouble early on that project from a project control standpoint. Our project team was to solve that problem among some other issues. We put together a great team. We had a great scope, fantastic team. I can't say it enough. We had a great schedule, a seasoned scheduler who did not believe in earned value at all. We took care of that. I just told them what data I needed and when, and I may have convinced him a little bit about this hocus pocus, as he called it, what I call math. But we had a great scheduler, and we established a great budget going into this outage. So again, overall, very well planned and executed outage on all fronts. So we, as I mentioned, we implemented earned value management from the get-go, time and material target price contracts. It was an alliance agreement, if you will. So there was incentives for the contractor to perform. So they had, we pretty much just had a contractor that did the labor piece. We bought the tubes, and all the profit was at risk for them. So they came under a set target, a number of man hours. They got a portion back as a bonus. And if they went over, it whittled down their fee at risk, as we called it. So, and then we perform weekly reporting with metrics, and we reforecast. So. I lost my my video of myself. Can everybody still see me and hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Okay, similar to Jim, we're gonna take some snapshots in time and talk about the data, what we reported, and again, kind of what we were thinking at the time on the project. So we're gonna take our first snapshot 2 weeks in. So you can see our SPI 1.06, pretty good, right? Just over 1, not bad. Liking what we're seeing. CPI had a little, not a great start, but we got the right trend. If we had ran the numbers, our TCPI would have been slightly over 1. So we have some improvement to make up. You can see we were running at a 0.16 variance between our CPI and our TCPI. Unknowingly, we were running a variance. So because we didn't run the TCPI. Won't spend too much more time on that, but we'll talk about what was going on at the time. So 2 weeks in, we finished all the asbestos removal and all the insulation removal, all the lagging around the boiler. Found some scope changes, overcame those hurdles, and we got into about a week of welding, right? So we're 9-week outage, and we got week 2, we're now into our welding. So we're just getting out of the gate, if you will, on the primary work we're going to be performing for several weeks to come. And our metrics are improving. We saw that. And so we forecasted our EAC was equal to our budget. So we felt like a little bit of the variance due to those additional changes. Again, this is an alliance agreement. We felt like we had those covered, and we could probably help. We probably could, based on the trend, make up for them down the road. So now we're going to take another snapshot at the 4-week period. And again, we're at SPI. Our trend isn't great. We're going down, but it's not too bad, right? We're right around 1. I mean, we're getting picky, right? Splitting hairs. Data is not perfect, but we're definitely where we want to be SPI wise. CPI is still increasing, so that's very encouraging. And if we had run our TCPI, we're at a 1.07. So we're running at a 0.14 variance through 4 periods. So with that, we're well underway with our tube replacement, which is very telling, right? We've got good trends, and we're just going to get, we feel as though we're just going to get better. So we identified all of our emergent work because the boiler's wide open, the mud drum's open, got the ash pit cleaned out. I mean, we've got the whole thing busted open. So we know where we're at, and we've issued all the change orders for that additional work. So we notice our metrics are improving, our SPI stabilizing right around 1. So we said, yep, we can still get there. We can still get there, even though we didn't come right out of the gate cost wise like we wanted to. So. Sorry. Right. So before I get to this next one, I'm going to back up. So at this point, at 4-week period, at 47% complete, we did some things, right? So we kind of know what our changes are. We know how much contingency we have left, and we're going to try to improve, right? So we've got this young PM who's phenomenal. And we sat down, and we actually had these weekly cost meetings, which was also cost earned value. And the scheduler gentleman sat in the back and listened to my hocus pocus, as he called it. But we had conversation about how can we improve. We came up with two ideas. One, the welders were complaining about we still had coal ash in the boiler, and it was impacting their quality. They weren't comfortable in there. They were very tight quarters. And so immediately the project manager says, let's do a full rollback on a Sunday. We weren't working Sundays. Let's do a full rollback of all the tools and we'll re-clean the boiler and vacuum it out. And that's what we did. So to improve quality. We also just came up with a little idea for a challenge. We're shooting for a 3% weld reject rate. We were doing 100% NDE. World class is 5%. We set our target for 3%. We were right around 4 to 5. And we really want to see what we could do to bring that number down. We wanted to beat that target, at least meet it. And every bad weld means rework, and it's just adding to our costs and delaying our schedule. So we came up with the idea of we would challenge the shifts against each other, and each shift we'd post the shifts before weld reject rate. So we posted those, and along with cleaning the boiler, and we saw some really good improvement. So we're hoping that only improve our productivity down the road. So performance at 57%, just one more period later. Go through this quickly because you're probably getting a sense of where the story's going. Is right, again, we're right at 1.0 our SPI. We're happy. We're making schedule. Our CPI continues to improve. If we were to run the TCPI to get back to our budget, we would be at 1.05. So now unknowingly we're in that 0.10 threshold in variance. We can get there maybe, we're over 50% complete. And we've really hit our stride. So reporting at the time, right? Again, metrics are improving. We hit that variance, that critical point of less than 0.10 between CPI and TCPI, and we set our EAC equals our budget. The best part about this period is what I'm about to show you. And I know this may not mean a whole lot to some, but it was a whole lot to this team. So the turbine overhaul was running into issues. They took over the critical path, and they needed funding for their changes. We as a site were able to fund their changes of $1 million at this point, right then and now. We didn't need this additional contingency. We didn't need. We felt like we had everything covered. We were using a risk-based contingency evaluation, and we felt as though we knew where we're going. We could cover whatever risk we had out there. So we released $1 million. Again, you've got to look back to 2 years prior, where they didn't even know where they were on the project halfway in, let alone towards the end. They knew their costs when they paid that last invoice. So this was a huge monumental task. We're very proud of what we were able to accomplish right there at the site without having to go back to corporate for more money as a site. So again, Jim had mentioned it. Project controls is all about, having a good system in place, collecting good data, performing the analysis and reporting out so we can make good decisions. This was a good decision we were able to make, helping out our team next to us. So how did this thing wrap up? So here we are pretty much at the end, 1.03, we're starting to diverge down to 1, right? We're finishing our scope. So CPI settling in nicely, right at 1.0. Obviously our TCPI to get back to our budget is decreasing, right? We can slack off, if you will, and still make it. It's kind of how I read that. You see a negative variance. So the cool thing and why I showed this is we didn't even know it, but that next week after we relieved ourselves of that $1 million contingency to fund the turbine overhaul changes, we did really reach and cross paths here with the CPI and TCPI from a data standpoint. We really, at that point, had hit our stride, and we had hit enough of it so that we could overcome any losses we realized to date, and then allowed us to finish under budget overall. So at the end of the day, very successful outage. It was, like I said, a target price contract. So our contractor walked away with a nice check. They received all their fee at risk plus a nice check, which is a nice way to walk off the site. And the earned value management model became a standard for all their outages moving forward. They had additional boiler outages to do. as well as whenever they used a target price contract, they call some of us cost engineers who had done this earned value on target price contracts to help out those teams get set up to do exactly that. So. All right. Here we go, Jim. Should have it.
All right. Just to wrap up, right? Again, we definitely believe that, you know, EVM is powerful, probably one of the most powerful tools in the project engineers, cost engineers toolbox. We certainly recommend at least consideration of adding TCPI to your system, and even if you don't, what I highly recommend is getting a copy and reading recommended practice RP ADR 13. Quite frankly, it's a pretty easy recommendation to say, get any and all of the recommended practices that pertain to your job and read them. I haven't read one that didn't have insight into what I do. There's a couple of the ones in the forensic world that I have at least 2 or 3 dog-eared copies with 1,000 post-its and highlights and circles sitting around my office at any given time. But, you know, estimate at completion, the name didn't jump off the page at me, but as I got into it, having been doing this for a long time, not necessarily considering myself an earned value expert, but fairly adept at most of the tools of project controls, I really found some things in there that Brennan and I presented that were new and really exciting to me from a cost engineer's perspective. Right. So now that you have the data, right, we hope that we can motivate you to try and use it and do something different. And one point I want to stress from the 2 case studies really is that, you know, even though the numbers themselves early on from Brennan's project, they didn't look as bad as case study 1, but they weren't great out of the gate. And you know, as Brennan mentioned, but it's probably worth stressing again, is that those bad numbers were identifiable. They were for some of the early work, some of the support type work, some of the scaffolding and prep and cleaning work, and they weren't necessarily indicative of the base scope of the project going forward. So even though the numbers weren't great, you know, it really wasn't time in that project maybe to jump off the cliff. And I differentiate that between the first case study where the problems were across the board and they were systemic and sort of pervasive everywhere on the project. So again, now that you have the data, right, we hope you can be objective with your forecast. We hope you can use that tool, just give you one more tool in your toolbox to do project controls. So I don't know if the system will be open your mic, or we'll turn it to Rob to moderate, or use the chat line, but we would be happy to field questions for anyone that would have any.
Thank you, Jim and Brennan. So not many questions posted, but I'm sure there's going to be some coming. I have one from Shoshana here that says, I would assume too that the forensic reviews have shown that the use of TCPI on a project reduces the likelihood of gaming the system by trying to rebaseline to adjust for poor performance.
I agree with everything. I agree with her question. That's for sure.
Yes, is the answer.
Yes, yeah. I would hope so. I mean, again, I would hope so. I would hope that it gives you a sense that you can't just keep resetting, right? Resetting that CPI back to 1 because you're going to rebaseline, reset your SPI and sort of start over. It's something that it's kind of, you know, I chuckle a bit at the question because I've run into that where in a couple of environments, without naming any names, where this concept of wanting to rebaseline is the sort of the first tool in the box, if you will. And I didn't realize that was as common as I would, but hopefully it's one more way to stop gaming the system. Yes, Shoshana, I agree with that.
Yeah, it happens a lot. Another question here from Rush. What's the best approach of calculating earned value of level of effort or / indirects associated with a project?
Jim, if you don't mind, I might take a swag at this one.
Go for it.
I did have some indirects, an indirect line item. It wasn't huge for this project specifically, but I just used the % complete of the direct work. and then gauge myself from there, and calculate off of that. It's not as a perfect science, but you still got to know what's in the numbers and maybe why you're not seeing what you're seeing. So you still have to do some intelligence on it, but that's how I did it. And I've also been in turnarounds at refineries where you've got a really good understanding of your direct hours, and you know what's in the indirect buckets and what your historical has been. Your historical usually is a multiplier, is what I've been. 20% indirects, 15%, and it's really case by contract. And again, it's carrying that multiplier through, but validating it too. So you're kind of keeping eyes on it. You go in with an estimate of a 20%, 20% indirects on top of the directs, but you estimate it, you still establish your budget with that, but also collecting that data separately, that indirect bucket, and just kind of monitoring to make sure that's still a good representation of how you should forecast it. So it's kind of a slightly different way of how we forecasted the job. But again, at the end of the day, you've got to be tracking that bucket separately and validating it. So there's two different ways of forecasting. I just explained the one we talked about here. One is in a refinery where we did things a little differently. But I think they're kind of the same, right? You make some assumptions up front, you monitor, you track those dollars separately, and then know what's in there and adjust as you need to reforecast. Hope that helps.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Brennan. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Good.
So Rush had a follow-up question, and is how do you calculate earned value for fixed price contracts?
Well, I mean, again, it really comes down to, it's going to come down to your contract, right? If you're talking about from an owner's perspective, what data did you contract for your contractor to provide you? There's an argument to be made in my mind that you can almost always calculate SPI as long as you have access to the schedule. And from an owner's perspective, there's sort of a school of thought that says that's really all you need, because contractor cost performance is sort of their own problem. Now, having spent much of my career in the claims world, I'm a believer that if the contractor has a significant enough cost problem, he's going to try and find a way to make it part of the owner's problem, some way, shape, or form via change order, claim, or something. But at the end of the day, if you haven't contracted to get the information, then CPI is really just going to be very difficult to calculate. But I'm a believer. I sound like Peter Pan when I say this, but when you can get parties that will go into a contracting arrangement with some level of trust and some level of open book sharing, then I think you have the best opportunity for success. But I mean, that being said, you're only as good as the last agreement you made, I guess, sort of thing. When things go south, they go south. So.
Yeah, I would agree. Again, I go back to the contract, but in a perfect world, you've already established, your contract that, how you're going to do that. And if it's a sophisticated enough contractor, the best way is a good resource loaded schedule. So you have good solid schedule values and you code your schedule accordingly, update it, and you can get a good idea where you are on each of those line items. So to Jim's point, you got to get signed up for that from the get-go.
Right. And Rush, it wasn't the question you asked, but on the first case study, it was because we were in court that we had access to all the internal information that the contractor was staying amongst themselves, which is where much of this insight comes from, quite frankly. Not on the information that was reported to the owner. So.
Yeah, no, that's true. Like, so if you don't get the right information, actually, the whole purpose of this EVM gets defeated. So you don't.
That's right.
That's what the challenge with the fixed price contracts. And what you mentioned is correct. You should have a right contracting arrangement in order to receive the right information. To calculate the earned value, and so does the forecasting.
Right.
Okay. Thanks, Tim and Brennan.
Yep. I will tell you, without too much, and we don't mention the clients, but the client for the boiler project that Brennan talked about has recently, because of some of the success of these projects, has recently really ramped up the language in their contract of the information they require from their contractor. So if you're going to work for them, you're going to, when you sign the contract, you're going to have to expect to provide some good project controls data to the owner. So
because
refreshing to see.
Yeah, no, that's right. But we find here, the suppliers or contractors are reluctant to provide the cost information, and even the case 2 presented here is like more. I was looking at the man hours, like, so
Right.
even that is challenging, like if some of our contractors, like, so in absence of either person hours or man hours and cost, like, how do you calculate earned value X? Yeah, just the person complete they provide. Yeah, of course they have to provide. So
Right. I've done counting activity completions in the schedule and things like that, but that introduces just a number of levels of inaccuracy and subjectivity to some extent. But you work with what you have, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. Like, you have to find the right way, the best way rather.
Yeah, exactly,
Okay.
Rush.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Brennan. Thank you.
Thanks, Rush. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It's bean counting doesn't work sometimes. Anyway, we have Jeff from our Calgary Chinook section here. Did I understand correctly that you selected cost as the metric? I'm curious on the rationale for selecting cost versus quality for earned value. Coming from construction, man hours or people hours are an artifact telling me how badly we've done on my estimated return ROP versus actual.
So, and I didn't jump in and correct Brennan, but you did. Brennan did actually misspeak that for these 2 projects, we look purely at hours. You mentioned cost, but we look purely at hours in these 2. And I'm not positive I quite understood the second half of the question, but at least in my mind, and I don't know, I put a little disclaimer here. I'm not 100% sure it's in 100% alignment with AACE, but in my mind, earned value, 95% of the value comes at measuring labor productivity and labor performance. And I personally think the man hours are where you get the value. When you start to try and balance an earned value system to a full contract value, where you spend a lot of time on indirects, back to Rush's question, or material procurement pricing or some of those things, I think you can lose some of the effectiveness, because at the end of the day, it's a measurement of the efficiency or the performance, I guess, for lack of a better word, of accomplishing the work. And I personally, Brendan may not even agree 100%, but I personally believe that 95% of the value comes just purely by looking at labor hours.
Jim, sorry, I'll jump in just to clarify there. I do come from a construction background, and I'm currently in industrial. And to me, it's physical in-place quantities of completed work, not quality. And that's really the metric, because then the labor man hours are really reflective of my rate of placements that I planned versus how we're doing, and then how do we recover the schedule out of that for earned value. So man hours is always good, but unless you got the context next to the actual physical in-place quantities, and as an owner, when I worked for several companies and airports, it was always our in-place progress physical quantity counts, meters squared of concrete PCC, light pots, all that good stuff. And now it's, pipe inches and install pipe, cable tray, all that good stuff too. So.
No, Jeff, you clarifying quality versus quantity lit up the question, and I could not agree with you more. Right. At the end of the day, it's one step further from my earlier answers. Is cost is muddied up with all the procurements and indirects. You're right. Man hours is one measure, but it's always as closely as you can measure the work. And I think I, like you, Jeff, have a varied background. So in certain industries, I'm thinking electrical generation, power plant type projects, those types of things, where you have great physical quantity measurement in place. Absolutely agree with you 100% that that's the place to go if you can. But the further away from those bigger projects you get, at least in my experience, the less frequent you find things like a good quantity measurement system in place. And man, I would go to man hours before cost. So. I think we're in agreement, Jeff. I think we're in agreement there, Jeff. Yep.
Yeah. The only thing I'd add, and I love where Jeff's, I love a good, quantity over time, earned versus planned. Any type of linear work, even on this boiler outage, we did welds over time as another representation of, we put that next to our S curve of earned versus planned, and just kind of look at it. Are they kind of singing the same song, right? Just as an extra step and extra validation. Right. So like it a lot. So.
Yeah, thanks. I apologize, Jeff. I misread your question there. It was,
No worries, Rob. I'll say hi to Rush and
my-
Shoshana. It's been a long time since I've seen them in person. So
my ability to read and speak English is challenged. Shoshana, I see your hands up.
Yes. So my one question, because the there that we are talking about is defined by a certain set of cost and schedule and productivity assumptions. And once we've armed ourselves with the new tool of assessing our performance with respect to TCPI, what kind of recommendations would you give from an owner and vendor side of the house to help people get there from here? Once we've assessed that we're off the page, how do we get ourselves back on? What kind of tactics could we use?
Wow, that's a $1,000 question there, Shoshana. But you know, I'm going to start with something that we talked about briefly, and that is first, you know, we've presented this thing as a bulk number, right? Where are we on the project? And a fellow AACE member who I would categorize as an earned value expert, maybe the earned value expert, you know, suggested vehemently that we show this with a little more detail around our control accounts. You know, and he's not wrong about that, but you have to limit what you can present. But first and foremost, you have to dig down deeper into the data, right? It's not one single number for the project. So you've got to determine, you know, where is that variance coming from? And then in the simplest sense, I'm going to oversimplify your question, but in the simplest sense, is it a systematic problem? Do we have issues with labor? Do we have issues with the job site conditions or something? Or is it a one-off event? Or is it, in Brennan's case, some of the earlier support trades, maybe there wasn't some performance, or they could have been as organized as they were. So it's the first step to that is really digging down and dissecting the problem. So taking the information and doing your cost engineering work and your project management work to dissect the problem, you know, and then from there, that's where I'm going to punt your question to some extent, Shoshana, because then it's really, you know, leveraging your team and your expertise as to how you solve those problems. But I mean, the question is great in the fact that it drives home the fact that a number is a number, and it's information, and it's what's driving and what's behind and what's making up that number. That's it. And then it's using the expertise of the project team. But, you know, in the world of projects, in the world of problems, in all of the various permutations, I don't know if I could even begin to start with, you know, or am qualified, quite frankly, to start with what is the solution to that. So,
Right.
So. Well said, Jim. I have nothing else to add. Mm-hmm.
I'll jump in just briefly, the Chinook Calgary section here. We hosted at the end of last month a presentation from one of our members who presented implementing a progress measurement system for mega projects. And it was based around his experience on the, I can't remember if it was Keystone or the Trans-Canada Energy pipeline.
Sure.
Multiple pumping stations, but they had broken it down nicely into the level of WBS to how to approach it for quantities and have that contracting language written into how they execute so that they can have a consistent system. And you guys and Bruce, I'm sure we can make that available to you guys.
That's awesome.
That'd be great. That'd be great.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, I think it sounds like one of the first keys is some very tight language for both the owner and the vendor with respect to project control data, with which to then report, and then having some very good reporting behaviors and review behaviors so that you can track on the right data and course correct early enough before you hit the iceberg. Right.
No, well said, Shoshana.
Yep. Which means back it up to the owner's got to have a really good plan in place before they start letting contracts.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Takes a good visionary group of visionaries as a team to figure that out early. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other questions? I have nothing else in the chat. Is there anybody that? Oh, we just got one from somebody. How do we ensure quality of work is maintained when the team is focused on earned value?
I mean, for us, it was high. We had a good quality. We have a quality plan. I'm not very close to it being project controls, but we had great construction coordinators. We had our own QA QC taking, shooting different levels of the surveying levels of the boiler, make sure they fit in, things were upright. We're doing 100% NDE. So we had a really good quality plan that, is an alliance agreement. That quality plan was a part of their contract, as the labor contractor, if you will, doing all the welding, installing the tubes. So I think it's having a really good upfront plan for achieving quality. And again, for us, we didn't have to shoot 100% NDE, but we chose to, because we wanted to be able to say, we wanted to put out a target and we wanted to beat it. So, that was the solution for us. But again, I wasn't very close to it, only from a reporting standpoint. But boy, when you start looking at the data I'm seeing and you throw the quality against it, I gave you a little example in there, but how they are really tied together. So, but a good question, because you could see how they could diverge. So,
well, right. The other thing I would add, I totally agree with Brennan, has to do with the quality in place. But I mean, whether we're talking about TCPI, a good schedule, or a good cost system, I mean, I'm an absolute believer, because I've seen it time and time again, that if you've got good control of your project and you're trying to solve problems, and as Shoshana said, course correct early, then you can avoid or at least somewhat minimize that mad scramble that happens late in a project when regardless of what the numbers say, everyone's still trying to get the job done. And I think that's when you're in the highest risk to, stretch out your workers, to either intentionally or unintentionally cut corners, or to get tired and sloppy because you're trying to push to that end, either that budget or that end date. And the more you can be in control of your project at the beginning, and then add what Brennan said to have those proper controls in place, I think that's how you can sort of maximize quality. I think that's where project controls adds to the quality component, is to try and keep that project in an orderly fashion. Just to tell a story, I was teaching scheduling to a building contractor near our office, and their executives came up at the end of the day and said, "You're all probably asking why we're teaching you scheduling, because we're a very high reputation contractor, and we get our jobs done on time." But he said, ask yourself this: when have you been on a project where we didn't have that mad scramble at the end? And that's why we have these folks in here trying to teach us how to schedule better, because we want to minimize that mad scramble at the end. And I think that's where project controls, as I said, along with supporting the systems that Brennan mentioned, it plays into quality.
Okay, thanks. Another question here from Daryl. Was the vendor on board with tracking earned value and showing metrics like people hours versus control accounts, or did the owner need to force them to?
In my example, they were absolutely on board. So it was part of the spec that went on the street. It's part of the RFP. You shall. This is what I needed when I wanted it. I gave them examples, templates of how I want their timesheets done. I spoke at the kickoff for the pre-bid meetings, explained that specification to them, looked for the type of people we were looking for them to have on their team. And I was a part of the review of the bids and the interviews of their team to make sure the people that brought forth, including, I wanted resumes of their proposed project controls folks. And hopefully they were in the audience of their interview. And we were able to chat then to see that they understood the specification, what we were asking for. And at the end of the day, it's just once we got the right team, on board, it's immediately, once the contract's inked, is we started to work with them. And we threw out some of the templates that I threw in there, and I tapped right into their payroll system, and I got hours when I wanted them, at the frequency I wanted them. And they were able to, we were able to solidify the control accounts and work that into their payroll system. So we were able to work really nicely together to automate a lot of it. So they were definitely on board, and they knew that this was the way this owner was going, and they wanted to show that they could do it. So yep.
In the first case study, the contract did also, and quite frankly, the EPC contractor was proud. They presented the classic earned value, as Brennan and I called it, the CPI, SPI, and the S curve for the control accounts as part of their standard reporting to the owner. That was in the contract, and they were proud to do that. Some of the insights and things that reporting, and some of the insight into their motivation, that all came in the forensic, sort of getting into their own internal emails and correspondence and that type of thing. But the first project at 1.2 million hours, it's in an industry, quite frankly, you would know the player's name. So these are folks that know how to do these systems. Their internal procedures read like an AACE recommended practice almost. And they have those systems as part of their normal operation. So they were comfortable giving it, but it was in the contract.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Thanks, Brennan.
Yep.
I don't see any other questions in the chat. I think it's on 8 o'clock in the evening here in Bruce County time. So unless there's any final questions, hearing none, I thank you. That was very insightful and interesting. I do have one poll I'm going to run at the end. It's just for people if they want to just answer. It is, do you think TCPI is something you would consider in the future?
Good.
So if you want to answer that and see whether this has changed your mental model a little bit about earned value and how to use it and what it can do for you in the future, then please answer that. That'd be appreciated. So far, it's 100% yeses. So I must admit, I've learned something tonight, and I think the whole purpose of these technical events is to learn something. So I thank you, Jim and Brennan, and good luck, Jim, in your future presidency. And I'm sure Shoshana will be challenging you as much as she challenges everybody else. So and working together and making sure we improve and make our association the best it can be. Brennan, thank you as well for your insights. It was much appreciated. And I appreciate also thank you to everybody who joined us tonight. We had up to 25 people on tonight. I think that just shows there's an interest in this topic, and I thank those for joining. So on that note, I'm gonna close tonight's event. We do, as I said earlier, we do have an upcoming technical event in July, which is an individual from General Electric who's going to give us a presentation on the technology behind small modular nuclear reactors. For those who don't know, most of us here work in the nuclear industry up in Bruce County, so it's an interesting topic. We try and mix up between our AACE technical events and some industry OPEX. So we'll be advertising that in the coming weeks. So if you want to join that, please do so. On that note, have a great evening. Please stay safe, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob.